Here's where it gets really interesting. What if the histories we've all been taught, the very foundations of national identity, are not just incomplete, but maybe intentionally obscured? There's that line from the poet Aino Leno in his story of the Great Oak. He talks about how the oak closed the light of heaven from the earth, and in the night the wistful people wandered.
A dark night of understanding.
Exactly, that image. It kind of resonates with some of the really deep and fascinating stories we're looking into today.
Right.
So today we're taking a deep dive into the really complex, often contested history of Northern Europe.
Okay.
We're focusing on the origins, the movements of people across these ancient lands, those huge environmental shifts they had to deal with, and how our whole understanding of identity, genetic, cultural, is, well, constantly being reshaped.
And you've given us a fantastic stack of sources for this. We've got excerpts on ancient settlement patterns, geological events, shall we say provocative analysis of Russian genetic heritage.
Definitely provocative.
And a deep look at how Finnish ancient history and identity are being reevaluated.
So what's our mission here?
Well, look, our job isn't to take sides or push any one theory. Think of us more like a compass.
Okay.
We're here to guide you through these materials, point out what's generally accepted, flag what's still hotly debated, and maybe most importantly, explore why any of this actually matters today.
Right. So what does this all mean for you, listening in? We're going to unpack these sources, pull out the most important nuggets, and hopefully give you some genuine aha moments about this incredible tapestry of Northern Europe's past.
Sounds good.
Let's start then by tracing that human tide, the movements that shaped the region.
Okay. So if we look at how people moved into the Northern Arc after the Ice Age ended, the sources talk about two principal movements.
Two main waves.
Yeah, but it's crucial not to think of it as like one group shows up and replaces the other. It's much more like overlapping layers. Think of a palimpsest, An old manuscript scraped clean and written over, but you can still faintly see the original text underneath.
I like that analogy, a layering. So this first layer, Wave A. Can you describe that one? Where did they come from?
Sure. Wave A, as the sources describe it, seems to be the slow, gradual spread of people. They came from areas like the Ukraine refugia.
Refugia, like safe zones during the Ice Age.
Exactly. Ice-free zones in the south. As the massive ice sheets started their, very long retreat, these groups just slowly expanded northwards.
Following the land as it became habitable again.
Precisely. Following the plants and animals moving into these newly available territories.
Okay, that makes sense. Slow spread from the south. What about the second big wave, Wave B? Where did they come from and what was different?
So Wave B comes later, during the Holocene period. These groups seem to have originated from behind the Urals, from the direction of Siberia.
Siberia. Wow, that's a long way.
It is, and this movement brought really significant new genetic influences. The most notable one is the Y haplogroup N1C.
Okay, refresh my memory, Y haplogroup.
It's a specific genetic marker on the Y chromosome, so it's passed down only from father to son, virtually unchanged.
Got it, a paternal line marker.
Right. And this N1C marker, your sources point out, is actually really common in Finland and the Baltic states today, along with, a smaller but still identifiable northeastern or Siberian genetic component in the bigger picture of the region's genetics.
Okay, so we've got this genetic layering, not just one group wiping out another, but still.
Yeah.
How did these people move across such enormous distances? It sounds incredibly difficult.
That's where things get really fascinating, and it's something we often don't think about. The sources really highlight the absolutely crucial role of rivers and waterways.
Rivers as highways.
Basically, yes. Especially across the vast European plain. Many of the major rivers flowing north-south actually had headwaters that were surprisingly very close to each other. Yeah, which meant people only needed short portages, carrying their boats or goods just a short distance overland.
To get into a whole different river system.
Exactly. Connecting east-west in a way you wouldn't expect.
Wow. That completely changes how you picture ancient travel. So the landscape itself kind of created the network.
It did. And then add winter into the mix. The sources point out that frozen rivers, lakes, even swamps, they weren't obstacles.
They became routes.
Excellent routes, is how the source puts it. Winter actually made travel easier in some ways.
So winter was a facilitator, not a blocker. Amazing.
Absolutely. And this combination, the interconnected rivers and the frozen winter routes, led to these extensive and surprisingly efficient east-west networks.
Ancient motorways, essentially.
You could call them that. They even allowed crossings over the low passes of the Ural Mountains in the north. It enabled connections and movements on a scale that's, well, pretty impressive for ancient times.
It really is. Incredible ingenuity using the environment like that. Okay, so we've traced human movement. Let's shift gears to nature's architects, the massive forces that literally shaped the land these people lived on.
Right.
Your sources talk about Doggerland. It sounds almost mythical, but this was a real place, wasn't it?
Oh, very real. Doggerland was this huge area of land, now under the North Sea.
Connecting Britain to the continent.
Exactly. During the Ice Age, sea levels were way lower because so much water was trapped in glaciers. So picture a vast, low-lying, probably marshy, maybe wooded plain where the North Sea is now.
Teeming with life. Hunter-gatherers.
That's the picture. A rich ecosystem, a vital place for Mesolithic people.
So how did it disappear? Was it like Atlantis, a sudden catastrophe?
Not really, no. That's the key thing. It was a slow process lasting thousands of years. We're talking maybe from around, say, 10,700 BCE down to about 7,000 BCE.
Millennia.
Yeah. It gradually shrank, became an archipelago of islands, and then eventually was completely submerged by rising sea levels.
So for the people living there, it wasn't one dramatic event, but a change their great-great-great-great-grandparents might have noticed starting.
Precisely. A slow generational shift.
How did they cope? You can't just build dikes back then.
Well, they adapted. They did what humans do. They moved, migrating to higher ground areas that are now Britain, Denmark, the Netherlands.
And changed how they lived.
Naturally. Their livelihoods shifted towards more maritime activities. Shell collecting, seal hunting, fishing became more important as the coastline changed. Doggerland is just this incredible example of human adaptation to massive but slow environmental change. Resilience, not panic.
It really makes you think about long-term adaptation, doesn't it?
It does. How would we handle something like that today, even with all our technology?
Good question. Okay, so Doggerland was slow change. But your sources also talk about something much more sudden and dramatic. The Storegga tsunami. That name sounds impactful.
It was. Storegga refers to a truly enormous underwater landslide off the coast of Norway.
Underwater landslide.
Yeah, right at the edge of the continental shelf. It happened about 8,200 years ago.
What caused something like that?
The most likely culprit seems to be unstable sediment layers that built up after the Ice Age, then probably triggered by a major earthquake.
Billions of tons of rock and mud sliding on the sea. I can't even picture it. That must have caused
a massive tsunami. Exactly. A tremendous wave.
Where did it hit?
The evidence is clear. It impacted Shetland, Scotland, Norway. Geologists find these distinct sedimentary layers on those coastlines, basically. A layer of sand and debris dumped by the wave, a silent record of the event.
Wow. So Doggerland was already shrinking due to sea level rise.
Yeah.
Did Storegga deliver the final blow?
It's definitely possible. While the slow creep of the sea was the main reason Doggerland vanished, the source suggests the Storegga tsunami may have accelerated its end.
Maybe washing over the last low-lying islands and sandbanks?
Perhaps. It could have been the final catastrophic event for the last remnants of Doggerland. The key takeaway, though, is that both Doggerland's slow disappearance and the Storegga tsunami were very real geological and archaeological events.
Not myth.
Not myths at all. They fundamentally shaped the map and the living conditions in Northern Europe.
Incredible how geology and climate literally sculpted the human story there.
Which brings us, actually, to identity.
Right.
How genes, language, and the stories we tell about them all get tangled up. Let's try and decode identity a bit.
Okay. And we can circle back to that Y haplogroup N1C we mentioned earlier.
The one common in Finland and the Baltics, brought by wave B from the east.
That's the one. What's really fascinating, and the sources call it a paradox, is how prevalent N1C is in the population today. Compared to the overall genetic impact of that wave B group, which seems to have been smaller.
Huh. So the marker is more common than you'd expect based on the size of the group that brought it in?
Right.
How does that work? What's the aha moment? The aha is really in the mechanics of how genes are passed down. Remember, the Y chromosome goes pretty much unchanged from father to son.
Right, the direct paternal line.
But the rest of your genetic material gets shuffled and recombined every generation. So imagine a relatively small group of men arriving, maybe the wave D guys.
Okay.
if they somehow gained a position of advantage, maybe they had better technology, maybe higher social status, whatever reason, and because of that advantage, they consistently had more children than the existing population.
Their specific Y chromosome line would spread disproportionately.
Exactly. It rapidly spread through the population over generations, even if those men were marrying local women from the earlier wave group.
So you don't necessarily need a massive wave of migration to explain a widespread genetic marker.
Precisely. It doesn't necessarily require massive migration. A smaller but perhaps socially or reproductively successful group can have a huge impact on specific markers like the Y chromosome.
That's a really powerful insight. It means widespread genes don't automatically equal population replacement. It could be something much more subtle.
It could. And this leads directly to another crucial point your sources hammer home.
Which is?
Language and genes don't always travel together. They aren't linked biologically.
Right. Language is learned. It's cultural.
It's a social tool, as the source says, not a biological trait baked into your DNA. Language change happens all the time, historically, without needing a whole new population to arrive.
Like English spreading around the world today, spoken by people with hugely diverse genetic backgrounds.
Perfect example.
So if it's not genes, what does make a community change its language over time? What are the drivers?
Well, your sources list several factors. Things like trade, needing a common language for business, social pressure, maybe wanting to speak the language of a dominant or higher status group.
Makes sense.
Administrative reasons, the language of government or law. And simple intermarriage across language barriers can shift things over generations.
So lots of social and cultural reasons.
Absolutely. And this helps explain puzzles like why Uralic languages, Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, Sami languages, etc., are spoken over such a vast area by people who actually have quite diverse genetic profiles when you look closely.
The language spread, but not necessarily through mass migration carrying those languages.
That seems to be the idea. Language spread through contact, influence, social dynamics.
Okay, this distinction between genes and language, it becomes incredibly important, maybe even explosive, when we look at some of the more recent research your sources cover, particularly around national identity.
Yes, the sources delve into some pretty sensational findings regarding Russian identity.
Sensational how?
Well, they present findings from what's described as the first comprehensive study of the Russian people's genetic heritage. It was reportedly done by Russian scientists at the Russian Academy of Medical Sciences.
Okay, and what did this study claim? This is based on the source material you were given, right?
Correct. We're reporting what's in your source here. And the central claim, as presented in that source, is stark. Genetically, Russians are not Eastern Slavs at all, but rather Finns.
Whoa, okay. That's a huge claim. What evidence does this source offer for that?
Again, according to the source, it points to genetic distance based on the Y chromosome. It claims Russians are only 30 units away from Finno-Ugric Finns, suggesting close kinship.
30 units. Is that close in genetic terms?
Relatively, yes, in this type of analysis. But even closer, it claims the distance between Russians and other Finno-Ugric groups within Russia, like the Mari, the Mordvins, is just 2 to 3 units.
Which the source interprets as?
As genetically identical. That's the term used in the source material.
Okay. And how does this compare to, say, other Slavic groups?
The source contrasts this sharply. It says Belarusians are genetically very distant from Russians, but close to Western Slavs like Poles and Czechs.
And Ukrainians.
It makes a distinction. Eastern Ukrainians are described as genetically Finno-Ugric, almost identical to Russians. But Western Ukrainians are presented as a completely different ethnicity, closer genetically to Tatars with links to ancient Sarmatian peoples from the steppes.
So a really complex picture, challenging traditional Slavic groupings. Again, these are the claims reported in the source.
Absolutely. We have to stress that. It's vital to understand we are relaying the information provided in your materials, not validating it independently.
Understood. And our source even mentions potential political fallout from this research.
It does. It states this research could have unpredictable consequences for Russia and the world order. It calls it a double-edged sword for Russian strategists.
Meaning?
Meaning, as the source implies, it could either be used to forge new ties with Finnic neighbors, or it could fundamentally undermine the traditional Slavic narrative of Russian identity, potentially causing massive internal and external shifts. It's presented as potentially destabilizing to established narratives.
A very potent idea indeed. Does the source mention anything else, like cultural clues?
Briefly, yes. It touches on surname analysis. It notes many common Russian surnames end in ov or ev, which it links to Old Bulgarian, suggesting they came via Kievan Rus's priests spreading orthodoxy among largely Finnic populations rather than from living Slavic languages.
Interesting detail.
And it also mentions an observation about many surnames being derived from animal names, potentially linking back to pre-Christian pagan traditions among those groups. Again, fascinating cultural details presented in the source.
Okay, so moving from these broad, potentially controversial genetic studies to more specific national narratives, our sources also tackle long-held beliefs about Finnish history.
Yes, particularly challenging the old idea that Finland didn't really have much significant culture before, well, outsiders brought it.
What was that traditional view exactly?
As your sources describe it, the traditional narrative often painted early Finns as sort of simple, ignorant forest dwellers. Until civilization was brought by Sweden. That was the common story. It even sometimes suggested the Kalevala, Finland's national epic, was just a relatively arbitrarily linked collection of poetry, not something deeply rooted.
But the material you shared argues against this, suggests maybe even a suppression of history.
It presents a very different picture, yes. It details quite a bit of evidence challenging that older view.
Like what?
Well, for starters, it points to Norse sagas.
The Viking stories.
Exactly. Foundational texts for Scandinavia. Apparently, some sagas mention Finnish kingdoms and powerful kings who even conquered parts of Scandinavia.
Finnish kings conquering Scandinavia.
That's what the source claims, citing things like the Funden Noreger saga, which supposedly says Norway itself was named after a Finnish prince called Nori.
Wow.
And it implies that some famous Norse rulers, like Harald Fairhair, even William the Conqueror, proudly traced their lineage back to someone called Fornjot, king of Finland and Kevinland, Kevinland being another ancient northern territory.
That turns the usual narrative on its head. What other evidence does the source bring up?
It mentions archaeological and linguistic clues. For example, the lack of Viking Age runestones in Finland suggests maybe Swedish influence wasn't that strong then.
Compared to Sweden itself, where they're common.
Right. And conversely, it claims Finns were apparently raiding Sweden in the 1100s. There's also a reference to an old manuscript, the Widsith, from around 600 AD that supposedly states Gaelic ruled Finns.
And place names. You mentioned those earlier being important.
Yes, the source cites studies by researchers like Henrik Andersson and Lars Holden, who identified hundreds of Finnish place names in Sweden.
In Sweden.
Yes, and they suggested there wasn't really continuous Germanic settlement on the Finnish coast until much later Swedish migration. Holden apparently believed much of the population on the Ostrobothnian coast was originally Finnish-speaking, but later became Swedicized.
So layers again, but maybe different layers than traditionally thought.
Possibly. And the sources go further, making some strong claims about historical texts, like suggesting that Eric's Chronicle, a key Swedish text from the 1300s, and even Michael Agricola's preface to his 1548 New Testament translation.
Agricola, the father of written Finnish.
That's him. The source claims these texts might be fabrications, or at least fictional stories, designed to justify Swedish conquest and dominance over Finland.
That's a serious accusation suggesting history was actively rewritten by the victors.
It's a very strong claim presented in the source, yes. It also mentions specific instances of alleged destruction of historical records by Sweden, like Gustav Vasa supposedly destroying archives at Kuusisto Castle in 1528.
And a later Swedicization wave.
Yes, in the 17th and 18th centuries, which the source argues further erased or obscured early Finnish history. The core point here, from the source's perspective, is how power dynamics can actively shape the historical narrative we inherit.
It's not just about discovering the past, but also about who gets to tell the story.
Precisely.
And this reevaluation isn't just about Finland and Scandinavia, is it? The sources also point east, towards Russia.
Absolutely. There's a rich, often overlooked history presented there, too. Early Russian chronicles themselves, like the primary chronicle.
Nestor's Chronicle.
Yes. They apparently depict Finno-Ugric tribes, the Muroma, the Murja, the Vepsa, as established neighbors of the East Slavs living in central and northern Russia before any significant Slavic presence.
How do we know?
Again, place names are a big clue. The source points to thousands of non-Russian names for places, rivers, cities across central Russia.
Like the Vova ending.
Exactly. In river names like Protva, Moskva, yes, Moscow, Silva, Kosva, the source claims this Ava comes from the Finnish word vesi, meaning water.
Linguistic fossils, hiding in plain sight.
It seems so. Even the name of the Oka River, a major river, might come from the Finnish joki, meaning river.
Fascinating. What else do the chronicles say?
Well, Nestor's Chronicle, written around 1100 AD, describes how the Varangians, the Rus, the Proto-Russians, actually founded their first major cities like Novgorod and Beluzero, Veljit-Järvi, in what were then East Baltic Finnish areas.
So they built on existing territory.
The source goes further, claiming Novgorod itself was originally an old Finnish city, and that Finnish might have even been the official language of its Vesh, its popular assembly.
That's quite a revision.
It is, and it claims the very term Rise, which later came to mean Russian, initially just meant traders in the region, and could include Finns involved in that trade.
So the meaning shifted over time.
That's the argument presented. It also mentions the great Russian scientist Lomonosov back in the 18th century, observing the clear linguistic kinship between all these Finno-Ugric languages spread across a vast area, Livonian, Estonian, Finnish, Karelian, and so on. He apparently theorized that these peoples were pushed eastward by incoming Indo-European groups long ago.
So even centuries ago, scholars were seeing these connections. And what about the link between Finns and the Sami, the indigenous reindeer herders further north?
The sources touch on that deep connection, too. Shared elements of reindeer culture, for one. Also, ancient rock carvings in Karelia, like the ones at Zelavruga, dated to maybe 6,000 years ago. They're often attributed to Sami ancestors.
Wow, deep roots.
Very deep. And linguistically, the split between Sami and Finnish languages is estimated around 3,000 years ago. There's even a suggestion that the old name for the Hem region in Finland, Shame, might be linked to the Sami's own name for themselves, Sabme.
Just layer upon layer of connection across the north.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a much more interconnected and fluid past than maybe we usually imagine.
So why does all this reevaluation, this digging into old sagas and place names and genes actually matter?
Well, as your sources put it quite powerfully, an individual's perception of their ethnic group's past and role among nations significantly impacts them.
How so?
If the history you're taught makes your group seem marginal or simple or always acted upon rather than acting, if you have an impoverished self-image, historically speaking,
it can lead to a kind of national identity crisis.
That's the term the source uses. It suggests that a fuller, more complex understanding of the past is actually crucial for a healthy collective identity.
And the sources also mention a challenge in getting these new perspectives heard. Something about academia.
Yes, it points to a potential problem of self-censorship, or what it calls a one-truth trumpet band, a resistance within some academic circles to challenging established narratives. It contrasts this with places like Estonia or Sweden, where it suggests archaeological study relating to national origins might be better funded or more readily embraced. It's a critique of how historical research is sometimes handled.
Okay, so we've covered migrations, landscapes, genes, language, contested histories. Amidst all this change and complexity, what actually held these northern communities together for so long? What were the enduring threads?
That's a great question, and the sources revisit this. They identify a few key elements that provided continuity and cohesion over millennia.
What are they?
3 main things stand out. First, hydronymy.
Water names again?
Yes. Names of rivers, lakes, major water bodies, they're often incredibly persistent, lasting for centuries, even millennia. They act like linguistic fossils, preserving echoes of older languages and peoples even after languages change.
Okay, so names anchor memory to place. What else?
Second, oral tradition. Things like rune singing in the Finnish tradition, or samijorks. These weren't just songs or poems for entertainment.
They were functional.
Highly functional. They were vital methods for recording and transmitting critical information mapping routes, remembering genealogies, marking hunting grounds, passing down myths and laws. Collective memory encoded in performance.
Living libraries, almost.
In a way, yes. And the third element, rituals and community solutions.
How so?
Shared rituals helped reinforce collective memory and social bonds. And practical, community-focused solutions, like the mention of longhouses in some contexts, supported a communal way of life, vital for surviving and adapting in a challenging northern environment.
So persistent names, living oral traditions, and communal practices. Those were the glue.
That's what the sources suggest. These elements allowed cultural memory and identity to endure even through massive environmental shifts and the ebb and flow of different populations. It shows incredible resilience.
It really does. Okay, so to wrap up, We've navigated some pretty complex currents today, haven't we?
We certainly have.
From those ancient migrations, the overlapping waves of people,
To the dramatic shaping of the landscape itself by forces like the disappearance of Doggerland and the Storegga tsunami.
and then diving into that intricate dance between genes, language, and how they shape our understanding of identity.
And we've seen how history isn't some fixed story in a book. It's constantly being discovered, reevaluated.
Sometimes challenging really long-held beliefs with new genetic data or maybe overlooked historical clues.
Definitely. It's a dynamic process.
So as a final thought for you to mull over, something directly from the source materials we looked at, how do you think the legacy of these ancient networks, these persistent memory techniques like oral tradition, and those huge environmental changes like Doggerland or Storegga,
Yeah.
how might they still influence or be reflected in the ways northern cultures and communities connect with each other and with their environment today?
That's a deep question to ponder. It connects that distant past right up to the present.
Gives you something to think about.
Indeed. And if any specific part of our discussion today really caught your interest, that's probably a good sign.
A starting point.
Exactly. The map we've kind of sketched out together here is just the beginning if you want to explore this fascinating subject further.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into your sources. It's been fascinating.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep digging.